So, why do bad things happen to good people? And why do good things happen to bad? Right? Well, we're going to unpack it. And there is an answer. The answer is going to be something you probably don't like. If you're looking at this video, it's going to be like, why does that happen? Which means you haven't figured it out yet, which means you probably don't like the answer. But it's time to kind of like explore it and kind of piece it together from some things that are true and kind of unavoidable. So, of course, you can go semantically, like what is a good thing and what is a bad thing and what is a good person, what is a bad person. But leave that alone first. The gist of it is like pretty much everybody's felt that at some point. And the reason everybody's felt that is that everybody starts life in the same place. Everybody starts as a little baby. And the baby's not a blank slate, it has stuff pre-built. But when it comes to like being a full-fledged person, it's a blank person. As a baby's just absorb and absorb and absorb, and they try to experiment and stuff. And they see what the results of that is. And babies need parents. Babies are completely helpless without a caretaker. And so as you like mature and grow up, you have parents for a long time. You need a lot of education and care and stuff to become an adult human. And it's optional to like keep maturing. Like you don't necessarily have to mature past a pretty relatively early point. You can be like a late teenager and just live the rest of your life that way. Getting better and more complex and whatnot is option. You don't have to do that. And at some point you have to transition out of that, the deep mindset of like you learned everything as a child with parents, all this basic stuff. It's all subconscious. It's all habituated. And at some point you have to gradually transition out of that. Like certain big chunks of it have to go because at some point you're not a child anymore. You don't have any, your parents, maybe they're not your parents anymore, right? They're still biologically, socially or whatever, but you're responsible for yourself. I know there's some cultures in which maybe that doesn't quite happen, but you need to be responsible for yourself, especially once you have kids. Like you have to be the parent for them. You can't still be a child to your parents. So you don't have to make that transition. You can just try to force life along without doing that. And that transition is gnarly for things that got habituated. Like, why do bad things happen to good people and good things happen to bad people? That question is basically framed from the perspective of a child talking to parents. Like you're asking the question of someone who makes that decision. Like, well, this was decided, right? Like someone decided to give a good thing to a bad person or a bad thing to a good person. And that's, a childish mindset is not the way the world actually works. For example, if a child takes a fork and goes over to the electrical socket and jams it in there, electricity is not going to, hesitate. Electricity is not going to be like, whoa, 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 kid, I'm not going to flow right now because you shouldn't get electrocuted. You have, you're a child, you need invincibility or something. If you like drop someone off a cliff, gravity's not going to be like, whoa, 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 that's a child. I'm not going to, have a child accelerate at 9.8 meters per second. No. Some stuff is just basic physical laws that just everything happens the same way for everybody all the time. And a lot of other things that are like applied versions of that, like chemistry is applied physics. At some point you get to like psychology, which is sort of applied biology and so on. So at some point it is more complicated, but you get to more complicated things and they're still all just applied simpler things. So a lot of it is still just natural cause and effect, following along. Like money for the most part is a natural cause and effect kind of thing. It's analogous to kind of like gravity. It's just value exchange. It flows, in a natural way. It can get weird sometimes, just sort of like water is complicated enough to get weird. Sometimes you get swirling vortices. Sometimes it freezes, whatever. Water can do strange things. So good thing happening to bad people and bad things happening to good people is basically a simplistic, childlike Lego building blocks of like, there are good people and there are bad people and there are good things and there are bad things. And that's only two options for each. And the key point of maturity is getting complex enough to go, okay, one thing, two things, many things, right? Like at least not two. And having that third thing is like the first leap, out of that childhood brain. It's like, well, there's good and bad. And then this third thing in between, that's not really good, not really bad. I got to figure that out. That's adding complexity to your thinking. So once you realize that, well, it's a childlike to lump things into good and bad and people into good and bad. Now it's like, well, Now this question doesn't make a lot of sense anymore, right? Because that's a childish question. It's basically like a kid asking a parent, well, how come they got that? How come I didn't? I'm good. I should get good things. And they're bad and they should get bad things. And we all got to mature out of that. We don't all mature out of that. You can have people who are chronologically, years wise, way up there and still that way. And of course, the thing that confuses it is they don't think about everything that way. They don't think of every single thing in that black and white, good, bad kind of thing, but it's still stuck there in a habit in their subconscious. And so it's automatic. It's cheap. It's easy. It's free. Those thoughts automatically get handed to them because it's been habituated by the subconscious thinking machinery to make it as easy as possible. And they haven't gone back and questioned that. And there's this weird thing I think that happens as people get older and older and older and never went back and did that, review work. Like, okay, that's something I believe as a child. It's time to put away childish things and go to more complex things. Is that they start to cement it in because they get really defensive about it. Like they kind of know, at a middle consciousness layer that I should probably reevaluate that. But they've got some attachments to the idea of reevaluating things or being wrong about something. That means oh, that's bad and dangerous. And so they feel uncomfortable about the idea of reevaluating this stuff. And then instead of interrogating the discomfort, they just blame the discomfort on whatever it was that made them think about this. And now they have an enemy. And so now they need to tighten up and to fight against that enemy and defend themselves against it. And so it's like a locked in. It's self-reinforcing now. Just because, there's a bad feeling. Well, let's blame that bad feeling on the thing outside of me, not on my own internal disconnect on the subject. So very easy to resolve, right? You've been uncomfortable, but as long as you just acknowledge, oh yeah, okay, so I probably need to reevaluate that. I feel bad about reevaluating it because, I have associations with, being seen as stupid or wrong, or like one of the fun things about maturing and getting more complex and having experience and stuff is that you start to feel cringy, if you don't feel cringy about yourself 5 years ago, every 5 years, you're not maturing. If you're still pretty much okay with decisions you made 20, 30 years ago, you've missed an opportunity to grow and become more complex and so on. It is appropriate to kind of feel bad a little bit about decisions you made in the past. Every 5 years or so, you should be growing and learning and changing, being more complex. And if you're still thinking, why do good things happen to bad people and bad things happen to good people? Then you missed an area in which you really should have been becoming more complex on that subject. And it's okay. Pretty much everybody does this. It's really unusual or at least it's reinforced, it's kind of glorified a bit, at least in my culture, current mainstream American culture, 2024. There's definitely a big undercurrent of combativeness, right? And warfare kind of, and key aspects of warfare are well, you got to be strong, you got to have good defenses and good offenses. You start framing things that way, and it becomes rigid. It cements itself. It's well, I can't just reevaluate this. If I reevaluate this, that's weakness. Weakness is dangerous. Weakness is going to be attacked and exploited. I don't want to be attacked and exploited, so I got to buckle down and I'll die on this hill. And it's is that hill really worth dying on? And absolutely, the principle of dying on the hill. I'll die, as a tough person who didn't back down, rather than live as somebody who was oh, that was a little embarrassing. I'm glad I got past that and go and move on and have a fun life. It's analogous to preferring to rule in hell rather than serve in heaven. That's a bigger philosophical. This is a specific version of that, because the ego is no, I'm not wrong. I don't need to change. I don't need to make room for something better, something more evolved, something more perfected, something happier, right? A happier situation. No. I'm perfect the way I am. Any change is dangerous. And I'm just going to stay right here, right where I am. The one thing I know, even though it's terrible, I hate it. It's awful, but I'm going to stay here. It's a very egoic thing to do. And following ego leads to hell internally. Because it's completely separated from everything else. It doesn't change. It doesn't grow. It can't enjoy anything really, except the most basic pleasures like sugar or fat or something. Ego likes sugar. Um, it doesn't like the the pride of achievement. So serving heaven is basically all that. It's basically like, well, humility is like, well, I don't know everything, and I got to get better and better, and be open to stuff. And maybe I'm not actually all that important. As an individual thing, and maybe I need to let some things go and become a better version of myself. That's like serving that bigger purpose, rather than being like the purpose is in charge rather than the ego being in charge. And that's, serving in heaven is way better than ruling in hell, but you don't get to be a ruler in heaven because, heaven knows what's best. So you have to be a servant in heaven. And then if you feel like you're the one that knows best in every situation all the time, ever, you're going to end up in hell. Cause you don't, you've only got like a little tiny brain and the world is complex and you can't do everything yourself. So why do good things happen to bad people? I think what I did was answer that it's kind of irrelevant because it's a poorly framed question. It's the kind of thing that a child asks of a parent. Why did you let this happen? Why did you make this decision? Why did someone make that decision for them? Answer for this other, there must be an adult somewhere that made this decision. And, most of the time that's not what happens. And there's this implication in it of like justice, fairness, justice, like not even just fairness, because it's usually fair, but justice. Like this was the absolute most rightest thing that could have happened. That decision has to be made, a just decision. And one of those things, it's like, as you become less childlike and more adult-like, this is a fun one, is that the justice system, systems of justice where they try to achieve justice and they make a ruling and like the gavel and stuff. Those are not intended to provide justice, in the abstract, definition of justice. Those are intended to bring finality. When the judge like hears all the sides and like hears the arguments and sees the evidence and like deliberates and then bangs their gavel, they're not saying that they came to a just conclusion. They're saying they came to a conclusion, because the whole, any big system of people, machines, stuff like that, it requires some amount of finality on decisions. You can't just keep bringing up every decision over and over and re-examining it and not being sure about anything. So the justice system brings closure to the topic and officially closes it. We're not allowed to bring it up again. That's what the justice system does. It does not bring like, cosmic justice of like in all possible situations in the fullness of time, this is the most balanced, best interest thing that could have happened. There's no way a person could possibly do that. Like that's up to God, and God is mysterious, right? God's not going to come down like bang a gavel and like, here's 20 pages to perfectly explain how this is cosmic justice. So it's related to that, right? Like why do good things happen to bad people, bad things, good people? The more complex version of that is kind of like, how come they got what I wanted and I didn't get what I wanted? It's a lot more like it, right? Because we don't really care about what's happening to other people, even the good, bad people, if we're not interested in the thing. Like, yeah, I remember this video of Mark Zuckerberg, like wakeboarding or something. And it was kind of a thing. It was a meme for a minute. And I don't care. I don't really want to wakeboard, I guess. I don't even like yachts that much. I don't like boats much in general. So I don't care if it's a good thing that's happening to someone, if he's good or bad. I don't care. I'm not interested in it. But like you have a crush on somebody and they go out with someone else. Like, why do bad things happen to good people? I'm a good person and I am not with the person because you want that person because it's interested, you have meaning to it, you care about it. And most of the answer can be explained by, well, that's just the natural playing out of natural laws, right? Like, why did you get electrocuted? Well, because you stuck a fork into a light socket, and that's going to happen to anybody, everybody, all the time. It's like, why did you break your leg? It's well, because you fell out of a tree. It's not like, is it a bad thing? I don't know. Like there's a Chinese proverb. There's always a Chinese proverb or a Chinese story, about a farmer. And, I'm going to butcher it, but like basically the gist of it is things happen and he's like, oh, maybe it's good. Maybe it's good. So, the farmers, whatever, they're like doing things and like the horse breaks its leg and it can't do things on the farm. And all his neighbors are like, oh, that's a tragedy. And he's like, well, maybe. And then, his son broke his leg. Anyways, like his son breaks his leg and he can't work on the farm. People are like, that's a tragedy. And then the military comes because they started a war and they take all the young men, but not his son because his leg is broken. All the neighbors are like, oh, it's a blessing. And he's like, well, maybe. And it goes on like that, right? Because, It doesn't take too much of a passage of time for something you thought was a blessing or thought was a tragedy to turn out to be like, oh, well, actually, maybe not, you know? And so like after enough cycles of that, you're supposed to mature and realize, oh, well, maybe I should just sort of suspend judgment because every time I do this, it ends up being switcheroo. It pulls a switcheroo on me. Thing that I thought was bad turned out, oh, maybe that put me in the right place at the right time or taught me the right lesson. The thing I thought was good, maybe kind of wasted my time. It wasn't that satisfying, so suspending judgment really becomes a more mature thing to do. You want things, but you still suspend judgment on them. It gets complicated. That's kind of the point. I can do another video about that, about how you're supposed to get more complicated as you advance. And the trick to like this, like why do people get stuck in why do bad things happen to people if good things happen to bad people, is that it's one of those levels of like complexity of thinking. And the trick to thinking in more complex ways is that every level of complexity can contain the level before it. It's more complex. It can handle the level before it, but it can't handle the next level because that's more complex. So every level you're at, there's this like trap where the next level of complexity looks stupid or wrong because you can't understand it yet because it's more complex. You can only understand the level beneath you, the one that you just came from. And that one is stupid or wrong. So you kind of fit the next things that come from the next level into the level beneath you and they look stupid or wrong. And so you have to kind of do this leap of faith thing where you're like, well, what if I entertain this idea and like kind of suspend judgment on it and see what happens. Right. Now usually people don't do that, which is why usually people only learn from mistakes, right? From punishment, from like the world, continuing along a path and having that path end in disaster. And then they're like, okay, I admit that didn't work. I probably should have like loosened up and explored a different path earlier, but I didn't. And now it hurts. And so I don't want it to hurt again. So I'm willing to try anything, even change my mind so that it doesn't hurt again. Something's got to explain this, right? Which is why, like say the levels of moral development, that are very objective and you can track everybody through them. They don't track with age. It's not about age. It's about life experiences. On the stages of moral development, you can have an 8-year-old who's like, like top third of moral development. And you can have an 80-year-old who's like still bottom third, just because the 8-year-old had a lot more stuff they had to deal with. And the 80-year-old just didn't have, they had a pretty easy, chill life. They weren't confronted by things that they had to change their mind about. Okay. So that's almost 20 minutes on why do good things happen to bad people and bad things happen to good people. And the key thing is, if that's something you're seriously thinking about, then you're ready to go up a level, right? A level of complexity. You're ready for it to make sense. You just have to like let go of the idea that this is the right way to think about it, or the better way to think about it, a more complex way to think about it, where you're not losing anything by letting go of that assertion. Good things, good people, bad things, bad people, that kind of thing. I mean, just think about it. It's Lego blocks, right? It's obviously little Duplo blocks. I got a yellow and I got a red, and those are the only options I have. And it's like, well, wouldn't you rather have some Legos instead of Duplos? You can fit like 10 Lego blocks into the space of one Duplo and it's more fun. You can handle that complexity. And if you're thinking about it, then that means you already kind of put the Duplo blocks aside and move up to Legos, in terms of how much resolution you can get. But it'll change you. You got to make sure that your ego is kind of, soothed, right? You can't get rid of your ego, but you got to help that guy out, man. Cause like the ego does kind of have to die like at every level of complexity because the old ego isn't complex enough to handle it anymore. So they don't die exactly, but you got to like put them away, and they don't want to do that because they don't know what's going to happen. And that takes soothing. It doesn't take punishment. Like never punish yourself, right? You're always advancing. You're always doing a little bit better or before. So that's a good thing to look at. You can look at the good side of it or the bad side. Oh, I can't believe I was just, or you can be like, whoa, that's new. I'm doing better every day. And the positive one is obviously much better for you. So if you're interested in this, I hope that maybe you share a little bit of your thoughts about good things, good people, bad things, bad people, that kind of thing, and how there's a better, more complex way to think about it that just works a ton better than that really simplistic, like childlike way of thinking about it. It's always really cool to have people go through these levels. And if you're a little bit earlier than that or a little bit beyond it, then that's cool. Let people be at their level, let people grapple with things and just kind of help them out. And keep in mind that it's all the journey, right? We're just figuring stuff out here.